Is Spain breaking apart? Catalonia's regional government decided to hold an independence referendum. However, the Spanish government, whose embassy is here in central London, vowed to stop the vote, which it says was unconstitutional. The two governments, the one in Madrid, the other in Barcelona, ended up on a collision course. Support for independence has grown recently as Spain endured a long economic crisis. Many Catalans are also angry about the Spanish Constitutional Court's decision to limit the degree of independence in the region. The independence movement, led by the regional president, has claimed that Catalonia has a moral, cultural, economic and political right to self-determination. In June, he announced that the referendum would be held in October and would ask voters, do you want Catalonia to be an independent country in the form of a republic? But his move has been fiercely opposed by the Spanish Prime Minister. The Spanish people watched a heated session of the regional parliament. MPs passed the so-called referendum law to pave the way for the vote. The government insists the referendum will be legally binding and promised to declare independence from Spain within 48 hours of a victory for the yes camp. But the Spanish Prime Minister insisted the referendum should not go ahead and promised to use all legal means at the government's disposal to prevent it, arguing such a vote would be illegal. Is the move towards independence about economics or something else? And why has Spain still got such a strongly separatist movement? Simple questions with important answers. And here's the first and simplest question of all. Why do Catalans want to be independent from Spain? That's the question we put to the Spanish public. Here's what they said.
I guess it's because they think that Spain steals from them. I imagine that part of their money goes to Spain and not to Catalonia, and they think that if they were an independent country, they would organize their money better.
Basically, this situation is the result of the brainwashing of the last 40 years. If you look at the demonstrations, the majority of the attendees are young people to whom this ideology has been instilled. In my opinion, everything has its roots on the self-government of different regions, and the idea of coffee for all that was created to satisfy the Basques and the Catalans.
They have many concerns, as they have had throughout history. They feel different in some aspects with regard to Spain. I don't know if to some extent part of them are being manipulated. I believe that many of them support this situation because it's something new. A lot of young people, too young, and I've seen children in demonstrations, which I think is a manipulation.
They have been trying for a time now, and that part of Spain has been very problematic throughout history. Many things have changed in Spain, and they believe that they deserve to be a different country.
Because they have a different language, as well as a number of cultural issues that are different from the rest. But this also happens in other parts of Spain. In Galicia, the Basque Country, Andalusia, all of them have special cultural features.
They are behaving with great selfishness and individualism. They believe they're more powerful than the rest of the Spanish communities, which I don't accept, because they've been helped throughout history by all the workers of Spain, especially from Andalusia, and there are many Andalusians there. They shouldn't have such contempt for the rest of the Spanish communities.
10 years ago, most Catalans would have been happy to have autonomous status within Catalonia. But having negotiated a second statute of autonomy with the Spanish government, that was effectively ripped up in 2010 by the Spanish Constitutional Court, which, for instance, removed from that statute of autonomy the definition of Catalonia as a nation and insisted that Spanish had essentially to be on equal status with Catalan in the Catalan education system. The experience most people drew from that in 2010 was it was impossible to negotiate with a Spanish state which was essentially a Castilian state, Castile being the main region of Spain, centred on Madrid. And secondly, that refusal of the Constitutional Court to allow a statute of autonomy which had been passed by a referendum in Catalonia infuriated people. So some million people went out on the streets. All of this in 2010 coincided with the financial crash and a severe economic recession across Spain, the imposition of austerity measures. And the Catalans blamed the Spanish state for allowing a financial and property bubble to build up in the course of the 1990s and 2000s, which then, of course, exploded with catastrophic results. And they also drew a conclusion economically and socially they'd be better outside Spain. And since then, we have seen really a confrontation between the government of Catalonia, the parties of Catalonia, and the social movements in Catalonia, and the Spanish state. For instance, the Constitutional Court striking down laws passed by the Catalan Parliament, including the law banning bullfighting, and most recently, banning Sunday's independence referendum and allowing the Spanish state, the Spanish government, to move in, as it has, into Catalonia with its security forces.
There's a long history of Catalonia historically having been independent or having been a separate entity before there was a national Spanish state. But if you look at more modern reasons, again, there has been a very long period, particularly from the time of the Civil War, where Catalans have felt very much discriminated against by the national Spanish state in terms of language, in terms of the flag, in terms of a whole number of things, where they felt that it made life more difficult for Catalans. And what they're asking for is something, I think, that whether we agree with it or not, they do have the right to have, which is independence from Spain.
Is the move towards independence all about economics, or are there other reasons why the provincial government has called this referendum? The Spanish public told us what they thought.
Like all movements, they have their economic connotation. Many people think that they've been mistreated economically speaking. I believe they have not. But as we live in a state with different autonomous communities, there must be some solidarity among the regions.
There is an economic reference underlying. They have always complained that Spain was robbing them, when it was them who were robbing their own people.
I think that mostly it is an economic issue. On the other hand, it could be perhaps as Brexit, because of their patriotic pride and the issue of bilingualism. But I think that basically their reason to separate is driven by an economic motive.
In addition to economic reasons, there are reasons of identity, of wanting to be who you feel you are. You can feel Catalan and only Catalan, you can feel Catalan and Spanish, and you have to respect all options.
For the politicians who want independence, yes, without a doubt, it's their excuse to keep their status. And with that status unchanged, they induce the common people to become pro-independent. It is possible that they have good intentions, but they do not have a historical basis.
Maybe, in essence, politics and economics go hand in hand, and the world moves in line with the economy. But I don't think that the main reason is economic. There are also questions of power politics. I don't know.
The economic reasons are very important because the 4 or 5 capitalists that have all the power in Catalonia want to take all the money, and that's why they want independence.
I think economic reasons are part of it, but I think what you also have to remember is that Catalonia has suffered at the hands of a Spanish state, and in particular the memories of the dictatorship of General Franco from 1939 at the end of the Spanish Civil War to his eventual death in 1975, when the language was banned in public use, Catalan Christian names were banned, books in Catalan, newspapers in Catalan, all banned. Civil servants were sacked and it had to be vetted, teachers were sacked. I know many Catalans who talk about their grandparents being able to speak Catalan but not being able to read and write it because it wasn't taught in school. And the scars of that still felt in Catalonia, and what the Spanish government is currently doing by sending in the Guardia Civil, the paramilitary police, which is very connected to the Franco dictatorship in people's minds, has reminded people of those years under Franco and the way the Spanish state has. And of course the ruling right-wing People's Party in Madrid they're not a Francoist party, but certainly the leading figures are the grandsons and the granddaughters of people closely connected with the elite, essentially, of the Franco regime. So that's a huge factor here.
I think there's a lot of economics in it, although we should remember that Catalonia is one of the richest parts of Spain. It's not one of the poorest ones, but in some ways that gives it a sense that it can manage on its own. You know, it's got its own industries, it's got its own infrastructure, and that it can be part of a wider European structure. But I've no doubt that there's also a sense that Spain as a country has been very much dominated by the Castilian-speaking establishment in Madrid. This has been true for many, many years. It's also been true in terms of the monarchy, which is obviously a very centralised monarchy. And the Catalans, I think, want to be able to say, we've got our own language, we've got our own culture, we've got all these things, and we want to be able to celebrate them and express them, and to have the independence which is allowed. And they feel still that there's a lot of discrimination, which I think the recent acts by the Spanish government only bear this out. You know, the fact that the Guardia Civil has been brought in to try to stop the referendum, the repression which is going on, are very, very serious questions.
The Spanish Prime Minister insisted the referendum would not go ahead and promised to use all means at the government's disposal to prevent it. Why is the Spanish establishment so worried? What's the Spanish public's view?
The referendum has lost all sense. It's a mixture so unrecognisable that if it's carried out or not, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that I believe we've hit the bottom. We must begin to talk. But to talk means wanting to talk, which is not happening at the moment. Neither of the two parties want to converse.
Because he believes that Spain should be united and not divided. If Catalonia gets this, then other communities, Basques, Galicians, would follow. We would end up with a divided Spain, and that's inconceivable.
They have not realized the situation until recently. The Catalan issue has been neglected. It is now very close, and it is introduced in a social and an institutional level.
It's a very important thing. In Spain, the civil war is still very present, and it also began with these types of political and economic problems. Now we have reached a delicate point.
To destroy a country and divide a nation that has 500 years of history is not a joke. No one, not any other nation, would want to do it. It is logical that the government is concerned. It would be the end of Spain. It's like a coup d'etat. It's the end of a nation that's been the most important in the world, along with England, Portugal, the Netherlands and France. They have been empires. It makes no sense to destroy a country like Spain.
The government clings to the legality, to justice, since the referendum is indeed unconstitutional.
It's normal to be concerned, because even if the referendum is not carried out, the germ is already there. The referendum may be held or not, but the most important thing is the next day. Mariano Rajoy must be concerned about it, because it's an uncertain outcome. It's not the referendum itself, but the consequences of carrying it out or not.
The ideology of Spain is about the unity of Spain. And over the centuries, a consistent attempt to deny that really the Catalans and indeed the Basques are separate. For instance, a constant attempt to say that the Catalan is not a separate language, which it is. It's as separate from Spanish as Italian or French. But it's an attempt to say it's just a dialect of Spanish. So the ideology, which is inherited all the way from centuries ago, but inherited particularly from the Franco years, is of Spanish unity, of uniformity, centralisation on Madrid.
I think that the reason the Spanish government and no doubt the monarchy and the establishment in Spain are worried is, of course, this will firstly, it will weaken Spain economically and so on. But secondly, of course, it's not the only part of Spain which wants independence. In particular, the Basque country in the north of the country also has very similar questions of language, of flags. And people should remember that under Franco, which was a dictatorship which went on for 40 years and was a very repressive dictatorship, both in the Basque country and in Catalonia, there was a great deal of repression of the people there.
The disputed territory is home to 7.5 million people. Polls show 70% of Catalans wanted to be able to vote in a referendum. However, the polling has always been more evenly divided about the outcome. A recent survey showed 49.4% of Catalans were against independence and 41.1% were in favour. The conflict between the Catalonian government and the Spanish national government has created a political crisis. How does the Spanish public view the way in which these two authorities have acted?
Undoubtedly, the Catalan leaders have been trying to increase their autonomy quota for years, and Madrid has not faced up to a constitutional reform, and these things are not easily done.
Both parties have done it poorly, but especially the government of Catalonia, because they've acted impulsively and in a unilateral way. Things shouldn't have been done like this. And also the government of Spain, because they've ignored this conflict for a long time. They should have made a move before.
Neither of the parties gives in. This should have been solved before with dialogue maybe. We shouldn't have reached this point. The government should have applied the laws, but for real, because they are not applying them now. This is one of those things that you set aside and become increasingly larger, and that is why we have come to this point.
The governments are corrupt, both Rajoy's and the Catalans, even the government of Andalusia. This is a country of corruption. Politicians just want to have a position and live at the expense of the budgets of city councils.
Mariano Rajoy's government has been very stubborn for years and has neglected the situation, entrenching themselves in legality and not letting the other side express themselves.
I do not think that neither the central government nor Catalan have done it well. They have dedicated themselves to insult each other and they have not said anything objective. They insult each other, they do not speak well. They don't try to negotiate. They only try to make a fool out of each other.
I think what the Spanish government is doing is really one of the most biggest affronts to democracy in Western Europe I can think of since 1945. And the silence from the European Union and European governments over what is happening here, the banning of a referendum, the seizure of ballot papers, the threats to shut out electricity to polling stations on Sunday, is really quite extraordinary. Now, your viewers might imagine if this was taking place in Turkey, for instance, they were very quick to attack Erdogan for banning critical websites, or it was taking place in Russia or Iran, there'd be a huge chorus of protest to the European Union. There's complete radio silence here, including from Westminster, over what is taking place in Catalonia.
I think the Spanish government has acted in a completely unacceptable fashion. I think that the Catalan government has got the right to call an independence referendum. That's what it's doing. Now, many people assumed before all this blew up in the way that it has, that the referendum probably would vote to stay as part of Spain. So in that sense, they didn't have to worry too much about it, or they didn't think that they had to worry about it too much. But of course, this action, this police repression, this seizing of ballot boxes, the threat to the mayors of the different towns in Catalonia, of course, will drive more people towards independence, will make more people determined to leave. So I think it's a very, very counterproductive act. And I think that whatever position one takes on Catalan independence, they surely have the right, as a very large group of people, to be able to decide whether they want to be independent or not.
From Catalonia to the Basque Country, why is Spain so divided with such strong separatist movements wanting to break up the nation? The public said this.
Although we are very similar because of the bilingualism, some traditions or other aspects, but we're also a little different. Maybe the issue of the economic crisis has had an influence, and the Catalan government wants someone to be guilty, and in this case, it is Spain.
They want to remember old stories when they had more power, but that must stay in the past. Just as Spain had America and we gave it up.
The majority of these people protesting are children of Catalan Spaniards. The problem we have today is that there is a rupture in the Catalan society at a family level. In your house, you have a mother who is pro-independent, a father who defends Spain, and a brother who defends another thing.
I have family in the Basque Country, and when ETA was active, I had more fear than anything else. I wasn't there with them, and I think that things are now very quiet and quite good. But I don't understand this thing about separatism and why they want it.
In Spain, since the time of the Taifa kingdoms, everyone wants everything, me, myself and I. I don't know if we will return to the Taifa kingdoms, because in politics, everything is a circle. Fascism, communism, democracy, in my opinion, they are cycles.
We are a nation of nations, including Catalans and Basques. Since the Middle Ages and even before, Spain has been composed of territories that have been conquered through the generations and history. We feel in our hearts that we are from where we were born.
I guess the old dictatorship that lasted 30 years has an influence on this. The dictatorial government had all the power centralised, and some regions with different characteristics always felt oppressed.
Well, the first thing is that both the Basques and the Catalans have their own separate language. They both share memories, which I've referred to, of what happened to them under the Franco years. They both reject the idea of a unified Spain. I think the two differences between what is happening in Catalonia and what's happening in the Basque Country are there was a long history of political violence in the Basque Country, the campaign of ETA to secure independence, which has now come to an end with ETA declaring a permanent ceasefire and scrapping its arms in front of international observers. But the Rajoy government has not accepted that. You know, it followed the path of the Northern Ireland peace deal, ETA, but the Spanish government hasn't followed that path, and that's important. So there's a difference that in the Basques have turned to violence in the past. The Catalans have never done that. The second is we have unity in Catalonia between the government itself is made of a coalition of the centre-right and the centre-left. The radical left, the Nationalist Party, supports it externally. It's not part of the government, but supports it. In the Basque Country, we have a division between the governing party, the Basque National Party, and more radical Basque parties, which the government is constantly trying to identify with ETA. So there's a divide in that movement. And it's not at all clear that the Basque government, led by the National Party, want independence. I think they're quite happy with a better deal, a better autonomous deal than Catalonia got. They have control of their own taxation. The Basque Country is more structured into the Spanish economy than Catalonia is. So there is a divide in Catalonia and an ambiguity in the heart of the Basque government about what's happening in Catalonia. I have to say the radical Basque parties, of course, have taken to the streets in support of Catalan independence.
There's been a long tradition in Spain of these movements, which dates back to before the Civil War. The Civil War in the 1930s, the nationalists, the right wing, the fascist side actually repressed nationalities in a quite brutal way, partly because those areas were identified with the Spanish Republic, but they did repress them, and they repressed them for many, many decades. It was only in the early 1970s they were still executing nationalists in the Basque Country, for example, and this was still under Franco. So that's the history of it, and obviously Spain has massive economic problems, high unemployment, big crash in housing a few years ago, many problems, very high youth unemployment, and I think people in these regions feel that they could manage their economies as well, if not better, than what exists in Spain. And as I've already said, they're not the poorest regions of Spain.
In March this year, the former Catalan president Artur Mas was banned from holding public office for 2 years after being found guilty of disobeying the Constitutional Court by holding a symbolic independence referendum 3 years ago. Other current members of the Catalan government are also facing legal action over their roles in the push for independence. The Spanish authorities seem determined to stop Catalonia from getting independence from the rest of Spain, including by using the police to try and prevent separatist activity. This has created a further political confrontation between the pro-independence regional government and the central authorities. The result of the referendum is, in a way, less important than the fact that the region seemed so determined to hold it. Spain is officially a single country, but recent events reveal a divided nation.